Hi guys, my name's Jenna Marie. I am a member of the Ark Church on the Gold Coast, and I know from first hand we welcome people everywhere, all across the world. That's another story. But I'm here just to spend a few moments with you, a few minutes, so hopefully you've got time to come and sit down on the couch and join me. Faith Unfiltered is what we're talking about, and I just want to share with you what I feel the Lord's been speaking to me about, and I do feel it's relevant to anybody in any situation. So we're going to talk today about Esther, primarily a little verse in Esther that states that perhaps she was created for such a time as this. And I mentioned that to a friend, and with my situation, she thought I meant doom and gloom, and that's not it at all. So I think it's important we do a brief rundown. So the king at the time, he had a huge kingdom, right? An absolute huge kingdom. There's three main characters. We've got the Jew Mordecai, his uncle's daughter's orphan, Esther, and we have Haman, and we have the king. So four. He had a huge reign. One day he decided to have a huge feast. He invited everyone, thousands and thousands of people. I don't think it was limited to status. There were pretty no pressure festivals. You could drink, you could not drink, but they went for a long time. So festivals went for 7 days. So Queen Vashti at the time, who was married to the king, also decided to have a feast for the women who were attending. So these feasts went for 7 days. On the seventh day, the king was a little bit merry, not too drunk, but a little bit merry, and he ordered the queen to come and join him in the courtroom, and she flatly denied. Now, this was a big no-no back in the day. She denied, and she didn't want to be around him when he had been under the effects of alcohol and didn't know what state he had been in for the last 7 days. So the king's advisors decided that was it, no more. The queen could not do that to the king. We were going to make an example out of her. So that was the last we kind of hear of Queen Vashti. A little while later, the king's servant suggests that they gather all the beautiful virgins in the town and to be brought before him, kind of like a beauty contest. So those that were picked got to actually spend a whole year in the kingdom and do training, basically princess training, I suppose, for a whole year before they were presented to the king. So Mordecai, the Jew, decided that to present Esther. She was beautiful. And Esther was indeed chosen. 12 months later, she, after beautification and bathing, it was a full-on routine, they were brought before the king, and the king loved Esther more than all the ladies, so the queen's crown went upon her head. Pardon me. A little time later, Mordecai, so it was kind of Esther's uncle, cousin, anyway, there was a family relation there. As I said, it was Mordecai was Esther was uncle's daughter's orphan. Sorry for the mumbling. So a little while later, he was sitting at the King's Gate, like all the high up, well-to-do, well-respected men did, and he overheard a conspiracy that was actually going on about knocking off the king. So he got word to the king as soon as he could, in an audience with the king, and these things indeed turned out to be true. But this is where the story kind of gets interesting. Haman, this other dude, who's kind of, also in the well-esteemed gentlemen that sit around the King's Gate, somehow manages to sneakily get his way promoted to over all the kingsmen, and become the right-hand man of the king. All must bow to him. This is like the king's degree. I've given him my ring, I've given him my coat, anything this dude says, it's just like I'm saying it, so please follow along. But Mordecai does not agree. So the men at the King's Gate ask Mordecai about this, and he says, basically, I'm a Jew. There is no way I'm going to bow except to anybody but the Lord God. So word gets back to Haman, and he's furious, right? Why won't this man bow to me? It's all about power and money. He vows to destroy the Jews. So Haman devises a plan. He goes to the king and tells the king that the Jews within the kingdom, they don't keep the king's commandments. So he devised a plan to get rid of them, to have them all murdered. So obviously Mordecai, when he heard about this, was devastated. This is his family, his people, and word springs around, and there's great mourning. Then Esther learnt in great detail and obviously was quite distressed. So remember, Esther is also a Jew as well. Born, bred, raised, married the king. So Mordecai passes a message to the queen. He commands her to go to the king. Now, this is something that wasn't done. You did not just rock up to the king and go, "Hey, king, I want a meeting with you." Not at all. Even if you were the queen, you had to wait to be summoned. So this was a really big thing. He wanted Queen Esther to stand in the gap, to stand up for her people. So now I'm just going to actually read from Esther 4:11. All the king's servants and the people of the king's providence know that any man or woman who goes to the inner court to the king who has not been called, he has but one law, to be put to death, except the one whom the king holds out the golden scepter to. May he live. Yet I myself have not been called to go into the kingdom, to the king's chamber, for 30 days. So Mordecai told Esther these words. So they told Mordecai Esther's words. It was a message being passed to and from. So again, it's not something you just actually go, "Hey man, I'm coming in," right? So Mordecai then told them to answer Esther, because it's all done by messenger. "Do not think in your heart that you will escape." Sorry, not very good today. No glasses. "Do not think in your heart that you will escape the king's palace any more than the other Jews. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet, who knows whether you have come to this kingdom for such a time as this?" What a lot to unpack. Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? We break that down, and that's the New King James Version. Somewhere else it's written, "Do you not know that you were created for such a time as this?" And that, to me, is very prevalent. It doesn't really matter what we're doing, what we're going through. We can be using our situation, no matter how scared, how fearful we are, still for the glory of God, to step out of our comfort zone, even if it means risking ourselves somehow. Maybe not death like Queen Esther, but risking our bareness, risking the essence of who we are, to step up and say, "Hey, I need to intervene here because somebody needs to be saved, or my people needs to be saved, or something's not right and somebody needs to speak out." You know, we all have lives, hobbies, jobs, family, stresses, worries. Society has locked us away from each other. But the Lord is always asking us to do something. So Esther sent word back to Mordecai and asked all the Jews to fast and pray. And while she thought and devised a plan and possibly contemplated her own death. So Esther 5:1. Now it happened on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace across from the king's house, while the king sat on the royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. So it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court that she did indeed find favor in his sight. The king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. Sometimes we've got to step out. Bit of fear. But if God's on our side, guaranteed the result's always going to be good. So the king, let's fast forward and kind of condense it a bit. So look, long and short of it, the king said, "Esther, why are you here?" She said, "I'd like to have a banquet. I just want to invite you and Haman, your right-hand man." Cool. He agreed. So that night they had a banquet. The king then said, "Ask what you wish, up to half my kingdom, and I shall give it to you." Queen said, "Hey, I want to have a banquet again tomorrow night." So Haman went home all like, "Oh, I'm the only one that's actually being invited to these banquets. And, the queen must really, really like me." And he was just on such a high and probably drunk. He then that night decided to devise a plan to kill Mordecai and get that side happening, to go to the king the next day and the queen, thinking he had favor with her, to go, "Hey, there's this man who's not going to bow to me. Let's chop his head off." So he built gallows. Apparently, They were 30 meters high in comparison to our metric law. Well, so they were huge. They weren't just, a little box and whatnot. They were massive. Again, Haman was on cloud nine. So the next day he goes off merrily to the banquet. Anyway, that night, and gets invited to the second one. So that night, while Haman is building gallows, the king couldn't sleep. Something made him think. He requested that the record books come back to him, and there was actually a record that he had forgot about Mordecai saving his life. So he started to ask the scribes what had been done for him. Well, nothing. So the next morning he was thinking about it again. He said who was in the court, and Haman happened to be there. Just as Haman walked in, the king said, "Hey, what shall be done for the men who the king delights to honor?" Well, obviously, Haman thought it was all about him. So he was like, "Yeah, man, I reckon that you get a horse and a robe, parade him in front of everybody and really honor him and get everybody to bow to his feet and smile and wave." So that's exactly what he did. He ordered Haman to get the king's coat, the king's ring, the king's horse, and parade him up and down the street in front of all the people. Well, Haman hung his head in shame. He was devastated. But that night when he was back at home telling his family were laughing at him, he was running late. There was an order at the door and he was rushed off to the banquet with Queen Esther. So we quickly jump through to Queen Esther 7, 3-10. Then Queen Esther answered and said to the king, because again he asked her, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given to me at my petition, and my people at my request, for we have been sold, my king. My people and I are to be destroyed, to be killed and to be annihilated. We had been sold, male and female slaves. I would have kept my tongue if that had been it, although my enemy could never compensate for the king's loss." So the king answered to Queen Esther and said, "Who is he? Who is this that would dare assume his heart to do such a thing?" And the Queen Esther said, "The enemy is the wicked Haman." So Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The queen arose in his wrath of the banquet and of the wine and went to the palace garden, but Haman stood before the queen pleading for his life, for he saw that the evil was determined against him by the king. And the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine. Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was, and the king said, "Will he also assault the queen while I am not in the house?" As the words left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. "Now, eunuchs, look, what we do with him?" And the eunuchs replied, "Look, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman." So the king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows, and he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's wrath subsided. Now the story goes on into how Esther saves the Jews. But again, perhaps we have been created for such a time as this. I know firsthand what it's like to go through struggles, trials, drama, health, financials. My story's not important. But what is important is the fact that I share God's love